The SNES Classic Edition was announced and it's coming out later this September, and boy am I excited, but I'm not gonna wait around like an asshole to review it. I have all the games right here! Except for Kirby's Dream Course. I don't have that. Sorry. I could review these other 20 games if you want. Can you get the intro go, please? Now that I'm in a safe location, let's begin with the most popular and well-known game on here, Jurassic Park. To be honest, I don't know how or why this is even on here. And you'd think they'd use the version of this game that was actually on the Super Nintendo, but nope. They use the version from the obscure and ill-fated VHS console. I mean, what can you really say about this? Much like every other game released for the VHS console, it's basically just one really long cutscene with no actual gameplay. The controls suck ass. The only thing you can actually control is the speed in which the cutscene plays and whether or not you want it to play backwards or forward. The controller was admittedly ahead of its time and laid the groundwork out for what would eventually become the Wii Remote, but sadly, the technology just wasn't there yet. To be fair, the story's still pretty good and the graphics look like real life, so you can bet your ass that I'll give this a 5 out of 10. Next up, we've got Super Mario World. I'm sure everybody watching this video knows what this game's all about already, with it being arguably the greatest 2D Mario adventure ever made. Being the very first game released on the console, Super Mario World set the bar higher than a giraffe's butthole and still holds up just as well in 2017 as ever before. Super Mario World easily gets a 10 out of 10. Next up is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, the true sequel fans of the series wanted after the underrated but still odd Zelda 2 on the NES. A Link to the Past perfected what the original Zelda started, and while this game might be a little difficult for impatient people in 2017, this game's well designed and left out all the cryptic bullshit and can be beaten without using a walkthrough or anything like that. The puzzles are great, the battling's fun, and the game doesn't hold your hand the entire way through. A Link to the Past also gets a 10 out of 10. Next, let's review a game that everybody knows about, but not nearly as many people have actually played all the way through. I'm talking about Yoshi's Island, not Super Mario World 2 as the title would suggest. Despite having the same characters, the gameplay is entirely different than Super Mario World. I can't believe that Nintendo would stoop so low as to give something a misleading title to garner more attention. I personally would never do anything like that myself. Now that the non-controversy was addressed, the fact that not that many people have played this game makes it that much better of a choice to put on the SNES Mini. The uniqueness of this game allows players to choose their difficulty by how much they plan on actually doing. If you just want to get to the end of each stage, you'll breeze through the game but still have a great time doing so. But if you want 100% everything, then this game will make you rip your own mustache off. Thankfully, the SNES Miniature has restore points, and you don't have to repeat entire levels over again just because you missed one red coin. Fuck anybody who calls that cheating. Restarting the entire level does not add difficulty, just waste your time. As well as fantastic gameplay, the game has damn near perfect controls, very relaxing music, and a graphical style that's aged better than possibly every other game on this list. Yoshi's Island gets a 9 out of 10. Up next is Super Punch-Out! Not to be confused with the arcade version, the long-awaited sequel to Punch-Out in the NES does not quite live up to its predecessor, TBHIML Ruffle Cruise Ship. The gameplay is just as good, in fact it might actually be better, the graphics definitely are, but this game just feels like it has no soul to me. The music's slow and boring, the sound effects are dull, and there's no Little Mac. I know it's an arcade port, but nobody knew that. Give us Little Mac, you butt doctors. While still a great game, I was just never able to get into it, and playing this makes me feel like it's a Sunday. Not sure if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but it just makes me tired. Super Punch-Out gets 7 out of 10 because I still do like it if I can forget about the original and Wii versions. Let's move on to an RPG though, with Final Fantasy 3, or 6, whatever. One of the most popular things about the Super Nintendo was the plethora of RPGs that are now among the greatest ever made, even to this day. Even though it's a travesty Chrono Trigger wasn't included, I'm not gonna be a bitch about it. Mainly because Final Fantasy 6 is every bit as good, and honestly I think just an ass hair better than Chrono Trigger. Sorry. Having one of the best soundtracks to any game ever, a fantastic turn-based battle system, compelling story, and memorable characters will probably make more people into RPG fans if casuals can actually get a hold of the console. Final Fantasy 3 gets, well, 10 out of 10, I'm not gonna lie. Since we're already talking about RPGs, let's move on to one with a much different battling system in The Secret of Mana. I haven't beaten this game yet, but I've gotten far enough into it to know that it's one heck of a mess of fun, and it does a great job at drawing you in right away, which is very important for RPGs to do with them being so long. Great music, story, and general vibes while playing this game make it an easy choice to include for the tiny SNES. Secret of Mana gets a 9 out of 10. Moving on to the next RPG, let's talk about Earthbound. I've actually already reviewed this game, and it's on the channel, so you should go watch that because I worked fairly hard on it, and no one watched it, and it makes me sad. All I'll say here is that it's hilarious, unique, flat-out fun, and I give it a 9 out of 10. The last RPG we have on here is Super Mario RPG. Role-playing games are popular, but nowhere near as popular as a certain Ron Jeremy lookalike. So why not combine the two together? Well, that's exactly what Square did towards the end of the original Super Nintendo's life cycle. I wasn't even aware of this as a kid, so I'd imagine a lot of others missed out on it as well, making this the perfect time for people to check this game out. The graphics don't hold up quite as well today as some of the other games on here, but still look nice and unique in its own way. The battle system's a lot of fun, which is pleasing for RPG fans, but not overly complicated to where crossover Mario fans might feel lost. Super Mario RPG gets a 9 out of 10. On a bit of a side note here, I hope that more casual gamers will actually be able to get a hold of the SNES Micro and be able to experience some of these RPGs that they never gave a chance to before. I don't think people are against trying them, but they don't want to pay money to see if they like it, even as cheap as they are on the eShop. I'm sure not too many random dads will play these, but it'd be cool if this genre picked up a little more steam over here in the West. But that's just wishful thinking on my part, since the scalpers are probably gonna ruin this for everybody anyway. Let's continue on with Donkey Kong Country. This is the first of many great games to come out of Rare during its legendary partnership with Nintendo. Admittedly, I prefer Donkey Kong Country 2 and wish that were included on here instead, but the original's still good enough to make you pee white mud and has just as much fun as it does challenge and charm. It doesn't take that long to beat, but there's a fair amount of replayability if you want 101% everything. And it's kind of a two-player game too, so there's that. Donkey Kong Country gets a 9 out of 10. Next on to possibly the best game in the entire Mega Man franchise, Mega Man X. Being a fan of the original series, this game blew my ass away when I was a wee lad, adding an assload of new mechanics like armor upgrades, an opening stage, dark and gritty story, vehicles, and the frickin' Hadouken! It starts off relatively easy, but the final bosses are harder than my dad watching Monday Night Raw. I'm sorry if that offended anybody. Let me try again. This game starts off relatively easy, but the final bosses are harder than my dad watching Tuesday Night SmackDown. Mega Man X gets a 10 out of 10, no question. Since we're talking about games with shooting involved and I can't think of a better segue, let's move on to Contra 3. This game's harder than my dad watching Sunday Night Heat.
You already said that joke, man.
Contra 3's better off being played with a friend, especially if it's your first time. The game has 3 difficulty settings, but if you beat it on anything besides hard, the game will just make fun of you at the end, so you might as well crank it up and get through it. I mean, you have restore points after all. As difficult as this game is, there's never a point where it's flat out cheap. If you die, it's your fault. Unless, of course, you get your controller stuck up your bum and need to sue Nintendo, but take my word for it and settle out of court, because this is a lawsuit that you will not win. Contra 3 gets an 8 out of 10. Let's talk about more two-player games, though. Street Fighter 2 Turbo might be the only fighting game on here, but really it's all you need. A lot of casual consumers won't be happy about the exclusion of Mortal Kombat, but Street Fighter 2 is just better, and the SNES Bitsy's guaranteed to sell out anyway. Plus, Capcom's already on board, so if you're Nintendo, why get more companies involved if you don't have to? I'm not really that big a fan of fighting games anyway, so I'd pretty much just be a dick if I tried to pretend to know how to review this game. But my friend Steve loves the genre and says that Street Fighter 2 Turbo is the best game in the entire series. According to Steve, Street Fighter 2 Turbo gets a 10 out of 10 if you're into fighting games. If not, then you'd probably give it lower. I'd give it probably like a 7 because I don't care. Moving on to other two-player games, we have F-Zero, a futuristic racing game that's surprisingly difficult. Along with Super Mario World, F-Zero was a launch title for the original console that hit it out of the park. It still holds up well today, and hopefully people start talking more about the series so we can get a new F-Zero on the Switch, but don't hold your breath. F-Zero gets a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the other racing game for the console, Super Mario Kart's probably gonna overshadow F-Zero for obvious reasons. It's fun, nostalgic, and has terrible steering. Well, that part's not gonna get people excited, but it's not particularly bad, just very sensitive, especially compared to the newer games in the series. This will be one of the more popular games on the console for sure, and it's an obvious choice to make the cut, especially if you're looking for two-player fun. Super Mario Kart gets an 8 out of 10. For those of you who like spooky games, Super Ghouls and Ghosts will be right up your alley. You play as a knight in shining armor, trying to save your wench from some asshole. Another great game with a relentless difficulty that'll make great use of restore points for those who can't take the heat, myself included. This is one of the games people talk about when they mention something being Nintendo hard. But difficulty doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, if you can only get through the first few levels, you'll still have a great time. The controls are absolutely perfect with no complaints, the music's great, the graphics are fantastic, everything's just fun. Super Ghouls and Ghosts gets an 8 out of 10. If one spooky game isn't enough for you though, you can also play Castlevania 4. Story-wise, it's basically the same as the original, where you play as Simon Belmont trying to kill Dracula. Unlike a game like Jurassic Park though, these games aren't meant to be played for the story. Much like Super Ghouls and Ghosts, this game has a bit of a difficulty to it, but the progression from easy to hard is better in my opinion, making this my preferred game. My only complaint is that the whip's a little OP, and because of this, there's not as much of an incentive to use other items. Castlevania 4 gets a 9 out of 10. Now that we're done talking about the spooky games, let's get to a cute one with Kirby Superstar. This is a mini-game compilation with classic Kirby gameplay instead of being a Mario Party type of spin-off. Personally, I'd have preferred a more straightforward game like Kirby's Dream Land 3, but what are you gonna do? The boss fights are fantastic, and you'll have fun the whole way through at least. Kirby Superstar gets an 8 out of 10. And like I said before, I don't have Kirby's Dream Course. Sorry. I do have Super Metroid, though. This is probably the best game on the console, and I'm not even talking about just the games included on the Classic Edition. The original Metroid was fun, but without a map, there's plenty of cryptic bullshit and way too many dead ends that'll just ruin your fun. This game fixes everything wrong with the original and adds so much more. Better sound, graphics, story, gameplay, weapons, power-ups, everything. There's just nothing else out there that matches the eerie and lonely atmosphere that this game offers. You start off weak and relatively defenseless, but progressing and exploring planet Zebus while building your suit up and gaining new abilities is immensely rewarding. Loaded with secrets, fantastic boss fights, and a hot babe make this hard to top as long as you have the patience to get through it. Not a lot of random dads will enjoy this one, but if you're not a kook, then Super Metroid gets a 10 out of 10. If you like space, and I know a lot of you do, then the Petite SNES has 2 more games that you'll love with the StarFox series. StarFox 1's a classic arcade-style on-rails shooter where you play as Fox McCloud using your spaceships and space guns to take down a space bad guy named Andros, and then presumably go get space babes at the space bar when you're done. This is the first SNES game to utilize the Super FX chip, and because of this, the game's able to run in 3D, and despite looking a little primitive in 2017, the actual gameplay still holds up very well. In fact, this game's so good that Nintendo decided to remake it twice. Kind of. 3 times if you count Star Fox Zero. Even though the game only takes about 25 to 30 minutes to complete, there's plenty of replayability with alternate paths. It's sure as shit good enough for me to give it an 8 out of 10, but the game everybody's talking about being on the Wii SNES is the unreleased Star Fox 2. Long story short, this game's been finished for about 20 years, but Nintendo didn't want to release it, apparently because they had little dick syndrome about a 3D game on the Super Nintendo being compared to the PS1 and Sega Saturn. Since then, Star Fox 2's file leaked online, and many people, including myself, have actual physical cartridges of it. Star Fox 2 is a little better than the first one, and many future games stole ideas from this thinking nobody would notice, like the free-range mode and being able to turn your spaceship into a walker. Although the controls for the walker aren't that great. Your goal is to work towards Andros on the main map and protect Corneria at the same time. If Corneria's damage reaches 100%, then it's game over. Much like the original, there's many different ways to beat this game and alternate paths you could take. My only real complaint with this game is that it's considerably easier, regardless of what difficulty you play it on. To be fair though, the ROMs and cartridges floating around on the internet are technically incomplete, with the finished version apparently having never seen the light of day. So that is a pretty big deal to look forward to when this new SNES console that's bigger than my PP comes out. The alpha version of Star Fox 2 still gets an 8 out of 10. I know I might come off as a fanboy by giving so many 10s out on here, but this is the Super Nintendo we're talking about. And I'm not just gonna lie so you'll hang out with me. I'm glad the SNES Classic Edition is gonna be released, and some people complain about it being $80 instead of $60 compared to the NES Classic Edition, as well as only having 21 games instead of 30, but the SNES Mini comes with 2 controllers, and the quality of games is much higher than what the NES Mini had to offer, despite there being 9 fewer games. I know this is supposed to be a limited run type of situation, but hopefully Nintendo gets their pinkies out of their butts and makes enough to go around, not only for our sake, but theirs. I mean, even the Atari Flashback console sold out the ass, and those games aren't even fun. Sorry, they're not. They're just not. They're nostalgic. The SNES Mini relies on nostalgia, but the games are actually fun to play, even in 2017. If Nintendo keeps these stocked, not only at places like GameStop and Walmart, but at random stores like Rite Aid and Walgreens like other plug-and-play consoles, then N-Dog can garner more attention to themselves and probably get people who've dropped off to look at what the Switch is all about. But I mainly want them to make more, just so I'm actually able to get one. And I know you watch this channel like a hawk, Reggie-san, so make enough, cause I'm not gonna camp out like an asshole. Don't feed the scalpers, Nintendo. Let me know what you think of the games down below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you're not yet. That'd be pretty cool if you did. Thanks for watching. See you later, Crocodile.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.